Hey, hello, and welcome to tonight's Coach on a Couch. It's one of the rare after dark sessions. Usually I do this earlier in the day. One of the things I've been thinking about quite a bit over the last few days is the nature of contextualization of practices. And during one of the sessions, I made the comment, values and principles endure, practices expire. And I was thinking more about what makes them expire, or even more relevant, what makes them not apply in the first place. And I got into the nature of a conversation with Mark in one of our sessions about the situationalism of practice and that, like, how situational various practices are in the first place. And the importance of conveying the context in which a practice is valid and useful as part of conveying a practice in the first place. And a classic example of this could be a team that is struggling to think through a design effectively before they start iterating, which costs them time and extra iterations they may not have. Back to the old adage that hours of weeks of coding can save you hours of design. And that was struck with me. I first heard it a couple of decades ago. Weeks of coding can save you hours of design. And it's so apt because sometimes we resist this concept of big upfront design so much that we don't think things through. So let's look at the process of creating enough understanding of where you're headed as a team so that you're going there together and having the motivation that you need, or having the directional clarity of how you're getting there together, especially if multiple teams are involved. And one is, yes, let's do a design document. Well, how much of one, how clear of one, how detailed does it need to be? That spectrum is very situational, not just, and it depends on a lot of different things. It could depend on the effectiveness and skills of design skills of the team. It could depend on the presence or absence of the architects and the value they provide versus the availability they can provide. It could depend on the number of dependencies, the technical skills of the leadership of the team. Lots of different factors influence how detailed. But there's also other practices that can provide similar design. If you do a little bit of acceptance test driven design, kind of sketch out what larger scale tests are going to be necessary, you drive some of those design conversations through that process. You can do that as a team before you go off and pair and write the code and do TDD at the lower levels and more fine-grained levels. Estimation actually serves a pretty effective design tool. So even if you throw away the estimates after you go through an estimation process, I've often found that the nature of getting enough clarity for a story or a feature to estimate it drives a certain amount of solutioning and design thinking, which in turn helps clarify the team or unify the team and get them on the right path. And I could go through any number of different agile principles or practices. Pretty much every practice that exists, I can look at it and say, what problem is this trying to solve? What benefit is this trying to provide the team? And based on that, when is it applicable and when is it less applicable? And from there, I can also step sideways and say, and what other techniques allow me to satisfy this need? And for a very mature team, the techniques might be wildly different than they are for a less mature team or a less experienced team. Similarly, if it's a team working in, say, a mainframe environment versus a team working in a greenfield web app environment versus a team that's trying to build and train AI models, those also have wildly different contexts, and therefore your approach towards testing, your approach towards planning, your relationship with the infrastructure group, all those different practices need to be different for those different environments. And this is where I think a lot of agile conversations let us down. As I look at a conversation around any topic, too often it starts with either way out there, hand wave the evolution, let teams figure it out, or laser focused, you're not doing this practice, therefore you're doing it wrong for any number of different practices. And while I fully happily support that many practices are nearly universal, say a good DevOps pipeline that takes risk out of deploying, even that has a lot of nuance depending on the technology and the environment, the skills of the team, and so on. So as you teach, as you coach, help yourself first and then the people you're working with really understand what matters. When you're working on a practice, when you're trying to improve skills, what's the nuance of the context in which a skill is good? And when is a little more optional and needs to be tweaked? When might you substitute a different practice in for the practice, and so on? Really look at providing that clarity, because I think through that clarity, you also help teams recognize when practices are expiring. As the team matures, my classic example, many teams that aren't good at working together, I'd like to see them doing detailed tasking. Not for the hours and estimates and capacity management reasons, but to understand each other's strengths and how they think about problems and breaking it down. And by talking through tasking together, they start to get into each other's brains and understand. And as they build that trust and that tacit knowledge within the team, I find that the need for tasking disappears, and you might just write the stories. A small, well-formed team that talks constantly and has similar backgrounds might actually not even need to worry about stories and just kind of have a sprint goal and a high-level bullet point list of stuff to do. It all depends on the context in the teams. Bring that nuance, bring that clarity to your clients, and help the teams recognize that there are enduring principles and values, and that the practices will expire, and help them notice when those practices reach their expiration date. Thank you. I hope you have a lovely day wherever you are when you see this.